So this is how it goes. We have complete hunger and minimal knowledge about most things. And when we embraced a dealer many years ago about Aboriginal art who asked, she said, is there a market here? And I said, I don't know, but I'd love to try. And I'm really interested in this story. And who wouldn't be? It's the most, the longest told, maybe amongst fewer people in the world than we'd like, but it is the longest told story in the world so far. So this people was also the source of a major exhibition that we did not know was soon to be opened at the Katzen Center. And we opened, I think, a few months earlier, or I don't remember, Jordan, you may remember, but we opened much earlier than the Katzen. And we became like going up and down Mass Avenue to see Aboriginal art. With Jack Rasmussen, who had this extremely exquisite collection that came from Virginia, right? He had works on bark and just multimedia expressions and contemporary, but a lot of original, exquisite, beautiful stuff. And then you could cruise down Mass Avenue and see the stuff that is currently, happening in the Central Desert. So there's so much to explore. We have focused on the Central Desert. But what we're going to hear right now is, there's just an enormous territory to cover. And I'm going to introduce you right now to Laura Reid Nix. And what's really interesting about this woman is she's not Australian. She's well schooled. She's the curator and cultural director, cultural arts senior program manager, rather. It's a seriously awkward title, at the Embassy of Australia, which is, think about it, she's immersed deeply into culture that is really intense, and we'll hear the story of its unveiling, so to speak. Her work includes curating and managing the Embassy Art Collection, partnering with indigenous experts on programs, and amplifying voices and stories. And she received her Master's of the Arts from the University of Melbourne, specializing in art conservation. Is that where you got the bug?
Yes.
Okay. So you work at this incredible building, this architecture that was clearly created with country in mind. What does country mean in Australia?
Amongst the Aboriginal communities and the Native people of Australia, country is more than a nation or just a boundary as it's often thought of in the Western world. It is identity. It's the past, the present, the future. It's their creation stories. It's their traditional practices like weaving or bark painting. It's their belief system. It's their family. It's the animals and their totems. So it's all, to them, everything is connected and everyone is affected by everything else. So country is all encompassing. It's identity. So when you talk about country, you're talking about people as a whole and their identity and a place and an entire system of life.
And curating in this vast, exquisite, vast and minimalist at the same time in architecture, monolithic in its approach, massive, made to look like dwellings or much earlier in civilization. What's it like curating in that space? The ceilings are, how many feet high are those ceilings? In the main
in the actual gallery, it's 20 feet.
Mm-hmm. But in the main area where you're also
the main atrium space is 6 floors.
Straight up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And remarkable architecture.
Yeah.
Can you describe that architecture again?
Yeah, so the architects are Bates Smart. They're a Melbourne-based architecture firm. Excuse me. And they actually designed the original building that sat on that piece of property, which opened in 1969, which is interesting because there's it's very, very different, but there's also some very similar vibes to it in a way. But
also for the embassy.
yes, yeah. So we moved in September 2023 into this new building, and it's designed to really give you the feeling of Australia's unique geography, the bright open skies, and the vast feeling of Australia. So you approach the building and you see these angled coppered panels, so you get this changing of orange and reddish hues, which of course are very much Australian desert feel colors, and it's got a very linear geometrical pattern to it, which is meant to mimic the organ pipe style rock features of some of the big rock forms. So the building itself is made to look like this, big piece of rock that has come out of a vast landscape. And then, of course, you walk into the building and you are suddenly in what Australians would call the bush. So the main atrium space is veneered in a Tasmanian eucalyptus. So you have these very linear bands of wood in there, and when we moved in, all the Australians were commenting on how much it smelled like home.
And the floor coverings are remarkable.
Yes, and we have two, actually we have several there throughout the building, but we have several carpets that are designed from Aboriginal paintings, and we have plaques that give homage to those artists. And we just recently, in the atrium space, the two yellow carpets there, we just recently had the artists finally get to come in and see her works in the space, Regina Wilson. So that was really nice. But yeah, the space itself is meant to really capture that very Australian feel, very, very connected to land, connected to environment. Yeah.
An incredible opportunity. Unavoidable to compare this. I found the ambassador rather tender the other day in his acknowledgement and his just beautiful reach. He was speaking to a number of folks at the embassy from various clans, I believe, representing various clans. But his tenderness about it was very very important to see, and I'm very appreciative of that, especially now. And I just wonder, this is a beautiful thing now, but it was not such a beautiful thing several decades ago. So tell us about the sort of transition and bring us to a point where Australians are looking at Aboriginal art, and then we'll jump into other spots.
So I'll kind of start out by saying that you might notice that the history is not that dissimilar to the history of the U.S. When colonizers arrived to Australia, within that first, I forgot the year period, but basically 90% of the Aboriginal population of Australia was decimated. And so, I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of culture loss. That's a lot of family loss. They were moved on to missions, similarly to here in the U.S. Cattle stations were set up out in Western Australia. Fences were put up, and these are lands where people lived, and they could no longer go places, and so they suddenly had no other option but to work on these cattle stations. There were certainly the occasions of people trying to work together to see a way forward. And that's kind of one of the really beautiful, resilient things about speaking with and working with the indigenous culture there is they understand that things are where they are now, and they understand that the only way forward is together. And so they're willing to do what needs to be done in order for their culture to survive, and sometimes that does mean adjusting their life slightly. And so there are several people that now own cattle stations and such. But early on, elders in some of these communities actually used art as legal documents to bring to Australian government, and most of these were bark paintings at the time. And so they came to government and were like, we want our land, we want to be able to be seen as people, we want rights.
And what did those bark paintings represent?
They represented their culture, their creation stories.
Their topography?
Their topography, yes. Often when you look at them, those original works, they are almost like an aerial view of a land. But most of them have never seen an aerial view of the land. But that's just how well they know the land and how well they're connected to the land.
And it's in scale. It's by scale. A lot of it.
Yes, a lot of it is. Yep. And it's just the detail of that is quite incredible.
So what? We'll stick to this for a second. The Australian discovery of Aboriginal art, was it discovering it as understanding it as a dreaming? Was it understanding it as representative of culture, or was it something of beauty, something to purchase, or all of the above?
Probably a bit of all of the above. Aboriginal Australians could not vote or were not seen as citizens until the 70s. And that's also when the first Aboriginal Art Corporation was founded, which is Papunyatula, in 1972. And
that's in the Central Desert.
Yes, that's Central Desert, and several of those artists.
Yes.
Yeah. And they actually were the first artists to produce art specifically for commercial purposes. But of course, it isn't ever just commercial as far as the creation of the work and what's in the work. Everything they paint is culturally linked to identity, to storytelling. So there were people like I've forgotten his name all of a sudden. White man came to Papunyatula area and saw these works, and they started painting a mural on one of the walls, and he was like, just do this painting here. And then all of a sudden they were painting on all these other things. They were painting on tiles, they were painting on whatever they had around, and it wasn't long after that an exhibition was put together, and works were commissioned for that exhibition to come over and to tour. And that was actually the first touring exhibition of works. Clifford Possum was in that.
Clifford Possum is over here. Someone asked me why did we stick him in the corner, and I said it's a shrine. It's not a corner. This gentleman might need some help coming in, or maybe not. Papunya.
Yeah, and I think with that group, it was the tour that came over was Art of the First Australians, and it came to New York. And we actually have about 5 of those works in the embassy collection that were actually commissioned, and they were the first large-scale works as well. But that's often why when people hear Aboriginal art and they think of the dot paintings, because the dot paintings are from Papunyatula, and those are the original commercially produced works.
These folks introduced. They not only introduced Aboriginal art for sale, but they had the trust, which is a very big thing in these cultures, these clans, these communities. They had the trust of the artists who were giving them their work, and they were doing actually very well for them. But they became leaders. They also had this connection with the international community was it converted very quickly, or I should say the outdoor I can't even talk tonight. I've just come off a plane and I'm really brain dead right now. It was the first real transfer from immobile, painting on a wall or something that is ethereal, that goes away, like sand. It was the first time that it was painted on something that was not only stable, but portable. And that was a really interesting concept for the Aboriginal people. And it transformed their practice.
Yeah, I mean, there were some communities that were painting on things like if you've heard about like message sticks, which were kind of like passports around communities and carried messages between
Is that what
clans.
you have some of those displayed at the embassy?
Where?
In the lobby? No.
No, I don't think we do. Okay. Yeah, but they usually they were like wood sticks, and they had engravings or markings or some paint on them. But they mostly started out as engravings, but. And then, of course, you have body painting, which is where a lot of the designs of many of the artworks originate from. Those are the clans' different styles of body paint and markings that they would put on their body.
One good example is to your left, sir, right here. That's melons, right? Mm-hmm. And it's body paint. It's a representation of what women would paint other women as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And do men paint men?
Yes.
Yeah. So how you have incorporated the indigenous into the embassy? Is it all indigenous that you work on?
No.
No.
No. So our work is to represent all of Australia, all of its people. There's an incredible diaspora community there as well. So the work that we do is meant to encapsulate all that, the different styles of people, different styles of art, people from different areas and backgrounds and identities. Yeah, but the current administration in Australia has a very heavy First Nations First policy. So the work that they're doing is meant to elevate the Indigenous voices in Australia. So those are the prioritized stories. We're giving people the priority that they had always missed out on before. Often,
it's got to be extremely difficult to work with clans that you're working with hundreds of languages over the entire country.
Yes,
dialects
I think there's like 500 or so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot, and it's an interesting interlude. Tell us about how you curated and first collected for all that the country holds.
That show actually was curated by Zali Morgan, who is a young emerging Aboriginal curator and artist and writer. So she actually was brought in by the Kimberley Aboriginal Art and Culture Corporation Co-op, which is an alliance of 6 art centers in the Kimberley region. But then she told me what she wanted as the title, which was All That Country Holds. And it really encapsulated, I guess, the story and the culture that they're trying to share through their work. They think it's their job to share their culture with the world, so that the world can understand, and so that we can all live together and work together. And so in this...
There's not painting for painting's sake.
Never. Yeah.
What does that mean?
I think probably the best way to kind of explain this is by explaining the role of the art centers within communities. So usually an arts center represents several clans in an area, but it became, because that was their main source, economic source for those areas that now had to live in a Western world where money was required, and that also became their community center. It became where they met their doctors. It became where they, could vote. It became where they, if someone passed away, they would have their burial practices there. So they became places of community where they gathered.
I'm here.
Oh, thank you.
So these art centers, in I want to mispronounce it.
Papunyatula.
Papunyatula. I always reverse the Y in the end. But in Papunyatula, you can see on these walls, which was the earliest of the art centers, right? The first of the art centers, masters, people who started the so-called dot in Aboriginal art right here. And then his daughter, who has that masterful Salt Lake, the black and white immersion on the wall. All of these, and there's no painting for painting's sake, and there's no just simple, oh, I'm going to throw this here. This is not an arbitrary situation. Mm-hmm. This is very mindful, very, very clear. I mean, they know their topography, they know their geography, they know what's on the ground, they know what's in the sky.
Yeah, and they, some of these works they produce quite quickly, others they work on for a long time, and some of them are community created works. You'll have an artist that is the lead artist that usually has their name on those works, but they are, they sometimes are just created by different people, and often on the ground, flat, so it very much has that look of topography where, you can, some of them you can hang any direction because there wasn't an up and a down or a bottom and a top.
And they don't sign them.
No, they don't sign their works.
Yeah. Just want to make that clear to everybody. He said, why is there no signature? It's funny, but it's the signature is easy for us to see after you know a certain artist's work. It's clear that that's a so-and-so. But there's no signature, but there's a very distinctive intellectual property associated with Aboriginal art. Tell us about that.
Well, I think most of it...
It's de facto.
Yes, and it comes down to the style and then the storytelling. So often within these communities, there has been a verbal or a song storytelling that has been passed down, creation stories, cultural practices, laws that they have to live by, guidelines that they have to live by. Some of these stories have different hierarchies of or sacredness to them, and only certain people can have privilege and pass and carry those stories, the weight of those stories, the importance of those stories. So the person that is given that privilege, it becomes the keeper of those stories. So often the stories that are painted on these works often tell you who or what family line. I mean, some of them it is hard to tell between like father and son, but the storyline that is passed down can be attributed to a family. And can be attributed to a certain area where those stories are, like creation stories, are specific to.
Yeah, I mean, for example, grandmother's country. We have a grandmother's country here in the corner. Sorry, these are only visible to in the first bay. You can come and see it in a little bit, but it's really a remarkable concentric circles, U-shapes, starbursts, lots of striations, and let's talk about this a bit.
Yeah, I think that one's a good example of...
Excuse me, I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to bring it over. That's good. We'll bring it. Okay.
It's a good example of kind of the traditional symbolism. So, like language, it's not a this symbol equals this. It's contextual, you know. So yes, often the circles are meeting places, but that meeting place could be a water hole or it could be a campsite. There are things that are definitely attributed, like you can pick out some of the prints of animals. So there's different prints that are common. And the U's are usually people sitting.
The impressions are fannies leaving the sand.
Yeah. But at the same time, depending on the story that's being told, those that could represent community or it could represent something else. So very much like language is contextual, the works are, and the symbolism in the works are contextual.
And omnipresent is one category of folks we haven't mentioned yet, which is the ancestors. That's big. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so that really comes back to those stories and that identity as well. So ancestors are the people that have given them those stories and given them those laws and those ways to live so that they can take care of the country can take care of them. It's how they survive. And, you know, ancestors are, like we would think of ancestors, but then they're also further back to the point where they are the creation stories. They are the animals. They are the land. So again, this just circles back to country, to identity, and like how everything is one and the same. Everything is connected. How the future is the same as the past because their ancestors lived through the land and through them.
It's that fluidity.
Yep.
And when Aboriginals have gone to court, they have, as you discussed earlier, they pointed to these to scale representations of their topography, their geography, their watering holes, their ceremonial areas. And they've said, this is where we have been for how many years? 65,000?
The current proven date is 65,000, I think, at this point.
That's respectable. I think those are squatters' rights right there. Yeah. So, the Australian interest in Aboriginal, there's a strong Australian appetite for Aboriginal work. And then I want to talk about the international market.
Yeah. I think within Australia, there's certainly a lot of people who recognize the importance of these works and the culture and the storytelling and how, I mean, you can look at them and tell that it's not just something pretty that they've created. These are things that have come from the depths of them, from their beliefs, the things that make them who they are. I think that people gravitate towards that. I think that's the same reason that people here have latched onto that as well. I admit I don't know a huge amount about the process of the popularity in Australia, but I do know here that there were collectors as early as like the 80s. So that first exhibition really brought a lot of attention to those communities, and you had people who may have already had links to Australia in the US that were then seeking out the art and visiting. I mean, a good example is John Kluge, who had an enormous collection, and he would travel over in the 80s and actually visit communities and purchase directly from communities and learn from communities. And when he passed, he donated his estate to UVA.
And that was the exhibition, the exhibition at American University drew from that collection. It's an extraordinary collection.
Yes, and the one condition was that they made a museum dedicated to Australian Aboriginal art. So in Charlottesville, 3 hours down the road.
Trip. It's a good idea. It's a good thing to do.
You have one of the only museums specifically dedicated to Australian Aboriginal art. Yeah, I mean, even in Australia, I don't think that there's a museum that is singularly devoted to Aboriginal art. There's galleries and things, but like as an actual institution, they're working on it though. That is something that's in the plan.
We're going to open this up to some questions, if there are any, and we're going to start with you, sir. And we're just state your name if you would, and belt it out.
John Oldock. So tell us, what are the hours at the embassy? How do you get in?
John's in line.
It's a beautiful show. The embassy is open during business days and business hours.
No weekends.
No weekends, unfortunately. We have recently had to up security, as probably most people understand why, and we are doing appointments only, unfortunately, at this point. But we have email addresses on the embassy website, and I have business cards, so you can contact me directly and set up an appointment.
And there's some really nice catalogs. Oh dear, really nice catalogs here.
For the show. Yeah. Right now it's by appointment only, but we've also been trying to have more evening availability nights. So like on Tuesday we had one that just for 2 hours people could come in. You had to register still, but you can come in and just view the exhibition space. So we're going to try to have more of those as well. If you have any social media, the Australian Embassy socials will always advertise those, and we will also send out to our mailing list.
Great. So it's good to get on that mailing list.
Yes.
Remember that. Good question. Yes, sir.
My name's Jonathan Levy, and I'd like to ask you to say something about the evolution of the materials used by the artists, from bark to perhaps other bases to paint on, and also the way the paints.
What the medium, how the medium has changed.
Yes.
Okay. You did talk about that a bit. Let's expand on that.
Yeah. So it varies quite drastically based on the locations of the artist. A lot of the artists in probably Central Desert and up to the top end still heavily practice with ochres. So they harvest a lot of these ochres themselves traditionally, and would mix them with water. So some of the earliest works were just basically natural pigments and water. So quite friable.
This artist here is an ochre artist. Right to your left, Jordan, is an original ochre artist.
And a lot of those materials, though, because it was during a commercial period that a lot of these were made, they actually mixed them with an emulsion. So a lot of the works that were produced from Papunya-Tula on are ochres mixed with an emulsion binder. So like Elmer, it's kind of the equivalent of Elmer's glue or something in there. But a lot of the communities that are further south got into the heavily into acrylics, and so their works are quite bright, and they have bright purples and pinks and just really vibrant colors in there. And I think that often has to do with the accessibility of a lot of those ochres in those areas. So the further south you're going, the more temperate the climate's getting, the greener it's getting. So it's not quite as prevalent to have a lot of those whites and red ochres. Now I will say in those northern areas, and this kind of connects back to that resiliency kind of adaptation, that I guess I should say specifically, this is specifically for the Yolngu people in up near Darwin area. The rule is that they can only practice their storytelling and their art on things from the environment, from the land. But they have an artist who, and if you have seen, there was the recent winner of the Telstra Awards in Australia, was this old street sign that had been engraved. So they took that bark engraving and painting process and have been doing it on metal, recycled metal. But this artist made the argument to his elders that these discarded things that had been put out into the land are now part of the land, and they would be taken over by the land and become part of the land. And so he's made that argument, and the community was accepting of that. So now these found discarded things out in the land are considered appropriate to use for that. So there's and I think the comment on commercial access, I think a lot of the artists will actually get mass-produced ochres because it's finer ground, and they can produce more and have more on hand. So it isn't always harvested for the artist anymore. I mean, they are certainly happy to use the what's the right word? Conveniences of mass production.
Good answer. You and you.
Melissa Bennett. Could you pick out one or two paintings here that you particularly like or appreciate, and just tell us a bit about them and how you see them and what we're looking at?
Turkey Tolson, Gabriella Possum.
Actually, the one that I first went to was, and it's not an artist that I'm familiar with, is Julia.
Yeah.
So I think she's younger, right? Yeah. So there's a work here that has the really fine, really small dots, and I knew that it was a water-related work as soon as I saw it, just based on how, one, the ripples, and two, the way the dots are placed. But I saw it and I was like, oh, that one's really nice. And then I was like, yeah, other people thought it was nice too, because it's sold. But again,
And that's acrylic on canvas.
Is it? Oh, is it?
It's
Yeah, it is.
acrylic.
Yeah. But at the same time, the stories that I know from these and the interpretations are what are provided by the artist. And that's as far as my knowledge can go and will go, because that's what we're allowed to know. So a lot of these works were originally painted to share their culture, especially the Papunitula works. They were painted in a way that would, what's the right word, disguise some of the more sacred parts of their storytelling, so that they could share culture more openly. So some parts of the stories might not be ones that they're allowed to share with the public and are very sacred to the community, but are part of the story that they're trying to paint. So they would find creative ways to interpret that story through the art.
Very well expressed answers to some very sensitive questions. Yes.
Well, this is
Tell us who you are, please.
Oh, Judy Mather. And this kind of follows on. What I'm familiar with is the dot work and telling the story and the journey. What I don't understand, would like to understand, is how this other style with the squares and the rectangles and all of that, I want to understand how that is telling a story, because this and that, I can understand, but that I don't.
I think Turkey's a really good example of this. This painting is really a version of this painting, and those storytelling. So this is still the geometrical squares and the layers, and so he's expressing the same thing through those works, in the sense that like the dots are that, like what you're saying, that traveling, that storytelling, that of the sorry, I'm losing my words now too. Yes.
But it is. There is. I would add just one thing about Turkey Tolson. He, interestingly, he was like all of us who grow older. We become a little bit reductionist. Yeah, we sort of minimize and try to clear out. And I do think that's reflected in his painting, because he clearly went from very different work when he first started to more complex, and then these are to me look like mid-century modern. You know, they could be in London or in Louisiana. I don't know, but they're to me they're very evocative, but they do tell a tale. And if you read about them and read the storyboard, you'll get more.
And there's actually an artist in the Kimberley show who painted those very topographical, like aerial view shots with dots that are tightly put on the canvas together, but you can definitely tell that it's still kind of dot applied. But then she went to this, visited a certain place, I cannot remember where, but she went to this certain site, and from that moment on, she just felt the calling to paint differently. So she now also produces these works that are very vertical, like of the landscape. So it's still like you can still tell it has a bit of like a aerial view, but it's flipped up a bit, and then a slightly changed perspective. And then she has these animals that are very much two-dimensional vertical perspective as well. And so she just felt the calling to from her ancestors to paint differently. And it was after a visit to like a certain sacred site that she hadn't been to.
Very interesting. You never know what inspires you. I just want to point out, isn't this Turkey's stepdaughter on the right?
No.
So these are, he had a great deal of influence on her. I mean, she grew up in a house filled with paint and canvas on the floor, because he was as busy as Clifford Possum was representing artists and promoting work and promoting his own work. She saw a great deal of art. That's what she chose to paint. And it's not dissimilar.
Yeah, I think what they choose to paint is a reflection of the story through them. So they're interpreting it in their way. So that's why they do look similar, but are often quite different when you look at them closely as well.
What if can you get the story wrong?
Can we?
No, can the painter?
Oh, that's a good question. I wouldn't think so. I mean, I think that the story that they're telling is one that has been passed down for generations and generations, or it could be one of their life. So there are works that are also telling a story of something that's happened in their life. Like we bought a print at Buku, which is in Yirrkala, like North End, Yolnu, same people that I was speaking of before. And it was this boat on water, but it's very geometrical, and it's using their body paint designs, which are those very linear geometrical kind of markings. But I asked the art center manager there, like, what the story was for this, and he's like, oh, they went out one day in a boat and the motor died. And they got stuck on this island while they were fishing. So basically they had to spend the night there. But then the artist was like, oh, I know what we have to do. And so they had like a old tarp or something in there that he like fastened into a sail. And that's how they got back home. And so he painted this story of, there's a lot more to it of like, them working together. And he talks about like the fish that they caught and like that they sat on the beach and that night.
This is all in your print?
Yeah, I
Wow.
mean, yeah. Which actually is based on a bark painting that is in the Queensland Art Museum. And they actually, the Art Centre convinced them to purchase the sale as well. So they have this like very like sticks and tarp created sail. But, you know, for them it was a moment that was notable in their life and where they learned something. And so that became a story that they chose to tell with their, you know, traditional markings.
A lot of hands. I got Joan over here, and then are you just raising your hand to point to Joan? Joan, you're a popular woman over there. Everybody's pointing at you.
Joan McEntee. I just wanted to know the Aboriginal population of artists. Is that getting younger? I mean, people are being introduced at a younger age, and is that catching on? Or is it still kind of, you know, the elders who have background and the knowledge and certainly the stories?
Did everybody hear that?
I think
Excellent.
it's predominantly the elders, but that is because of the interruption of colonizers more than anything, right? Because there were people taken off of their land. There were people moved to different parts. There's a whole generation that's called the stolen generation because children were taken away from families. There are communities, and in fact, two of the works that are suspended in our atrium space are from a mother-daughter duo who are part of a community who were, because of their removal from their land and their people, completely lost their traditional practices, lost a lot of their language. So the mother, Sonia Carmichael, her work was researching their traditional women's weaving practice. And so that took her around the world to different collections, brought her to Natural History Museum here, where they found one of their ancestors' woven bags was. And so she's made it kind of her life's work to relearn all these different styles of weaving that were traditionally practiced by her family. And now she does workshops and is reteaching those. So there's a lot of work, and there's government-supported work around that now to make sure that language is taught so that they can keep their traditional languages. There's difficulties with that and the fact that dialects are being lost because, if you have one select area teaching a language, you have to choose a dialect, right, within that. You have, government-supported initiatives that are trying to help them give access to resources so that they can keep their culture strong. Yeah.
Yes. Why is
Please tell us your name.
Céline Faux.
Céline
Why-
Faux.
Yes, there's a focus on the painting, and what about the other way of expressing textile, jewelry, weaving? That's less commercialized.
Questions about the other media.
There's a lot of other mediums. There's like the weaving practices. There are, which, I've gotten a pair of earrings that were created by women in the community. There's a group of rangers, and not everyone's an artist. I have to say that too. There are people that work in the art centers from the community. There are, not everyone is an artist. Lost my train of thought just now.
Just talking about various ways of expressing.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's sculpture.
There's sculpture. They carve animals and ancestor identities, totems. There's some artists work with clay.
But the dreamings really are the dreamings. The paintings are really the expression of the truly.
It was the
Focusing on
introduction into the and it is the storytelling more than anything. I think those other items do that storytelling, but it is a specific part of their culture. While I think the the paintings are deeply embedded in many aspects of that culture, if that makes sense.
I have a question. How long did it take to get this blockbuster exhibition on the road?
The NGA one?
Well, the one that's at the NGA, but was from the Victoria Museum.
I think that was a 5-year plan, I believe. I believe Kaywin and Tony, the two directors at each of the museums, met at a conference or something and just started chatting. And I think that like from then to conception, it was 5 years. And all of the works in that show are from the National Gallery of Victoria's collection, which is in Melbourne.
And how many pieces are in the exhibition?
I think it's 200-ish.
That's a lot of pieces. So
Yeah.
we look forward to seeing that. And some of our artists are represented in that exhibition. Turkey, Tolson, who we just discussed, and Clifford Possum. Anybody else? Those two?
You have a river? Do you? No.
No.
Clifford, Turkey. Gabrielle might be. I'm not sure.
Oh, Gabriella? Oh, yeah, she might be as well.
But there's also contemporary photographers. There's also video works. I mean, these artists also practice contemporary, and some of the younger generations, especially, have moved into that space as well.
The photography is identity oriented.
Yeah, a lot of it is portrait based, is what I find, or and land based. Yeah.
Really interesting, and really, in a way, when a culture is scarred, this is a sort of a self-healing culture, because it really does continue to produce art that says who they are, and put such a community-wide emphasis. Not that everybody's painting or has anything to do with the paint itself, but it's very much part of their identity.
Yeah, and I think that makes a good point yes, these are their storytelling, but some of them are actually them also working through the trauma of the history of everything that's happened to them through the arrival of colonizers. So it is and you find that in the Kimberley show. Prince, who lives on a cattle station, it tells that story of how his family was forced to work there, basically slave labor. They paid them in rocks, and he actually just won a case with the government over that and got payment out of that.
These are very interesting cases to look at if you have any extra time in your life to look at these cases in Australia. It's fascinating.
But all of his works are very very cattle, almost Wild West looking kind of style of works, and you wouldn't expect when you see them for them to be Aboriginal works, but they are his way of also working through that, telling that story, working through that trauma also.
Any other questions? We're gonna one more. Of course, and give us your name, sir.
Andrew Estrin. I think you started out by saying that about 90%, as soon as the colonizers came, about 90% of the population was destroyed.
Yeah.
And so it just makes me wonder, the 10% that remained, were they representative from the rest of the 90%, or they?
Can anybody hear this question? So, Andrew,
Yeah.
my brother's name. We were talking earlier, but he says if 90% of the population is destroyed and 10% remain, did that remaining 10% represent the various clans across the country?
I don't know the numbers around that. I would love to be a historian around this stuff, but I'm not. But I do know that some communities were lost, but there's also links between the communities through families and through people that did get married and things like that. So I think there were languages that were lost. I don't know how many there were. I don't know if there's even record.
Does anybody know?
Yeah, I do know that the indigenous population of Australia is currently 2% of the population, but makes up
And the population of Australia is
oh, I don't know.
20 million.
Okay.
21 million.
Yeah, much.
So somebody's going to send us a note on this, I know.
It's
What an idiot you are.
there's the comparison that I tell people is that if you lay the U.S. and Australia map over each other, they're generally the same size, space-wise, but the population of Australia is equivalent to or close to the population of Texas. So that gives you an idea of scales of economy and the vastness of a lot of areas of Australia. And, you know, a lot of those pockets are metropolitan areas along the coastlines.
This has been really, there's so much more I want to know, and I will know because I'm really curious. But you have expressed, as I said earlier, so much very, very delicate information in the most beautiful way. And tonight really is about art and humanity. And you can see this humanity is 65,000 years old. And we just heard a little bit from a real expert who I'm just delighted you were here. So thank you all for coming. Please make sure to check out the Embassy of Australia's work and follow Laura's endeavors because she's the real deal. And what do we have anything to announce? Nothing. Surprise! You'll find out later. Thank you for coming. Thank you.